Hi everyone, it's Lindsay and welcome back to another video. Today I have 3 different cards to share with you where I'm doing a little bit of stamping over stenciling, and I have a few tips and tricks to share with you too. So the first card, I will be using the plaid fringe stencil from the Crafter's Workshop. I'm just going to do a little bit of stenciling in the top left and bottom right corners of this cardstock panel I have here. So for my stenciling, I am using the Twilight ink from Catherine Pooler, and I'm using a jumbo ink dauber to put that ink through the stencil. Now, I like to use a dye ink for my stenciling, and then I like to use a pigment ink over the top for stamping, and I'll share with you why in just a moment. But there you can see my finished stenciling. I didn't go all the way across the card base. I just went ahead and did a little bit in the corners. Now, like I said, I'm going to be doing some stamping over the stenciling. Now, in order to do my stamping, I'm going to switch to a pigment ink. Dye ink soaks into the fibers of the paper. It's going to blend together a little bit, and if I was to do any stamping over the top of this with dye ink, it's going to mix with the ink underneath it. The pigment ink is going to sit on top of the paper, so it will sit on top of the stenciling. The stenciling will still show through unless you use a true pigment that has like that chalky appearance, almost like a chalk ink, but those won't show the stenciling through them. However, I am using VersaFine Clear ink, which still have a little bit of that clearness where you can see through the inks. If you want that completely gone, use a true pigment ink. However, I like the look of a little bit of the stenciling coming through the stamping, so that's why I went with this ink. Now, to make this card, I am using Joy Claire stamps today. This is one that I have used before. I will use that video linked down in the description box, as well as all the supplies I'm using today will be linked down there as well. So if you have any questions, you can head down there. For the stamping on this card, I'm making it very easy on myself. I am using my Misty to do my stamping. I have got my little creative corners down in the bottom right hand corner there, so I can just flip this around and stamp on both the top and the bottom corners. I know this is going to be exactly the same. I don't have to do any guesswork. So I started with the 2 flowers. I used a purple and a yellow, both corners, and now I'm moving on to the leaves, and I'm using a dark green, which is called Rainforest. I'm stamping a couple leaves first on the top, and then what I do is I take out my panel and just flip it around. That's all I do, and I can stamp the leaves on the other side as well in the same exact spot. Everything's going to match up and be really symmetrical. I've moved my leaves to another spot, so I'm adding 4 different leaves here. And again, doing the same thing, stamping on the top, then I'll flip the panel over and stamp on the other side as well, so everything's nice and symmetrical. The last thing that was left to do was stamp my sentiment. I like to use something nice and bold on these kind of cards where I'm going to be doing some stamping over stenciling. I like it to show up. I like it to be prominent. So I am using the Hello Sentiment from Hello Sentiments, the stamp set from Joy Claire. I'm also using the Nocturne ink, which is a nice, rich, bold black ink to go over that stenciling. And that is it. That is the card. It was 1 layer, super easy. All I had left to do was attach it to a card base. And that was it. There's not any dimension on this card at all. It's nice and flat. Will go through the mail super easily, but I still love the look of it. Now let's go on to this next card that I have here. Now these stamps that I'm using today are not solid like the ones I just used, but you can still use them to do some stamping over stenciling, and you can still fill them in. It's super easy to do, and I'll show you how to do it. So the first thing I needed to do was add my stenciling to my card. I am using a Crafter's Workshop stencil. This is actually a cake and cookie stencil. However, I like to use it in my crafting because I'm not a baker. I've said it many times. The only thing I want to remind you again, and I'm sure if you watch a lot of my videos, you're sick of hearing this, but once you have these in your craft room and you decide to use the cake and cookie stencils in your craft room, Don't take it back to your kitchen. You're never going to get everything off of that. You don't want to eat inks and stuff like that. You just don't want to ingest that stuff. So just if you're going to use them in your craft room, leave them in your craft room. So I did my stenciling with Bellini ink, which is a dye ink from Catherine Pooler. And now for the stamping over the top, I'm going to go to my pigment ink. I'm using VersaFine Clear ink in Nocturne. This is a nice black ink. And I'm using the Hosanna stamp set, which I have used this before. Again, I've done some Bible journaling with it, and I made a card too. I will leave that video linked down below. Now for this card, you can see I'm stamping with that leaf or frond, whatever you want to call it, on the top of this card, but it's not solid. So you're still going to see the stenciling in those leaves. And I didn't like that look. It wasn't bold enough for me. You could absolutely leave it like that. It still looks nice, but I wanted mine bolder. So I'm going to finish stamping this out, and then we're going to start filling in. Now, you could do this with any color of ink. I'm just using black. It's nice and easy. It's nice and easy to match later on, which you'll see in a moment. But I love the look of bold black over stenciling. So that's what I'm going with today. And I thought this had a really tropical feel to it too. So I'll stamp a few on the sides. I'm not going overboard here with these. You could overlap them if you wanted to, because these will all be filled in a moment. However, I left mine as is. Now it's time to start filling these in. I like to use a marker. You can use any marker you have on hand. I'm using my Memento marker. It's got a nice fine tip on it, so I can really get into those crevices and spaces, and it's going to play well with my ink. Now the tip with this is to get your marker to match your ink. So if you decide to do this, just make sure you have a marker that's going to fill in the ink that you choose, whatever that may be. You could use alcohol markers. You could use colored pencils if you wanted to. I just happen to like the look of this black, and it's, again, super easy to match. So I colored in all of those leaves to make them nice and bold. Then it was time to stamp my sentiment. I went back to that Hello Sentiments because it's got that nice, bold, prominent sentiment in it, and then I stamped a little sunshine underneath it as well from that same stamp set. I'm using black for this, so everything's going to be nice and graphic and bold on this card. And again, that was it. I matted this with a little bit of black cardstock and attached it to a card base. Super simple, but I love the way this one turned out, and I especially loved that I was still able to use some of my non-solid stamping to quickly make this card customized. So now my third card. I did not love the way this one turned out. However, I went with it, and I want to show you a trick to help you with your scenes that maybe you don't love so much. So I went ahead and cut out a circle from my panel that I'll be overlaying later on. That's going to be where my little scene is, and I'm doing a quick scene here. So I'm using painter's tape to mask off that circle that I drew on my card base. I'm doing all of my stamping, stenciling on the card base itself. And then I'll overlay that panel on top of it. I'll go ahead and place down a quick mask I made to create some ground and just kind of mask that part off before. I masked several scenes this way. It's super easy to do, and I love when I can just get away with using my painter's tape. Now I'm using the stencil from the Crafter's Workshop. Again, this is a cake and cookie stencil. However, I'm using it in my craft room. But I'm going to just do some very quick ink blending with some Catherine Pooler inks. Again, I'm going to those dye inks. So I'm doing a little bit of an ombre here. I've got some yellows and then gradually stepping up to a nice rich orange color to create a sunset look. I'm putting it through the stencil with some quick ink blending with the help of my jumbo ink dauber. I am not switching these ink daubers. I am going from my yellow to my orange with the same dauber. It's going to help everything blend together, and it's a less waste of product that way. You can also go back into your yellow. It's not going to contaminate ink pads, especially with that little of ink. Now once I have that exactly how I want it, I'm going to take that stencil and rotate it a little bit. Cover up those parts that I've already done the ink blending on. That's going to be my sun. And then in between all those little things, I'm going to put some blue ink. This is the It's a Boy ink from Catherine Pooler. I'm just using a sponge to quickly sponge these on. I'm going darker towards the center, then lighter towards the edges. Now, I was not loving the way this was turning out. It just wasn't looking quite right. But I still went with it. I keep going and I keep going and I keep going. I hate throwing things away and I hate starting over. So I just keep going and try to make something that I like. And in the end, this one wasn't so bad. It's not my favorite, but it's not the worst either. So the sun needed a center. I'm going to take that jumbo ink dauber that I used before, and starting with my yellow, I'm just going to very quickly sponge a center into that opening that was left. Then I'll kind of bring it out and around and kind of cover up that whole sky to create my sun look. Now I need to go ahead and put in my grass. So I move my stencil or my mask to the top where I can go ahead and create my ground now. I'm using some lime murky ink and my ink blending tool just to quickly add a little bit of color. I wasn't too hopeful for this one, so you can see I'm moving along quite quickly and not taking a lot of care at this point. For my stamping, I am using some images from the Springtime Flowers stamp set. This is one of my all-time favorite Joy Claire stamp set. I've used this so many times, and I've done some really cool techniques with it. I will leave those linked down in the description box below. They all have videos, so you can check them out. But I'm going to stamp these with the Nocturne ink. I'm going for a silhouette look here. So I'll go ahead and stamp those down very quickly. The little puff on the right side had a little bit of an opening in that. So I'm going to stamp it again very quickly, but I will come in with my black marker and fill in that coloring spot just like I did before with the little palm branches on the other card. I just used my black marker to quickly fill those in. Still wasn't crazy about this scene. Too bold, too bright for me. So what I decided to do was add a little bit of vellum over that circle opening. It kind of toned everything down, made it look a little bit more well blended than it was, and a little bit better than it actually was. I still don't, it's not my favorite, but it works so much better with the vellum over it. So if you ever create a scene where you're like, I just don't like it, try adding vellum over the top. It worked for this one, and I hope it'll work for you too. But there you have some easy ways you can add stamping over your stenciling and make some super quick cards that are really one layer. That is going to do it for me today. I want to thank you guys for watching. Don't forget all the information down in the description box below. Happy crafting, everyone.